Sincere.
Tactless.
Versatile.
Careless.
Optimistic.
Restless.
With good judgment.
But too often irresponsible.
That's Sagittarius. A few years ago, most people thought that astrology began and ended with the stars columns in the newspapers.
And by the way, astrology hasn't anything to do with the stars.
But nowadays, most people know it's more complicated than that. A real horoscope shows the positions of the sun, moon, and 8 planets as they were in the sky at the moment of your birth, and as they would be seen from the place where you were born.
So your own horoscope is yours and only yours. To have the same birth chart, that's what astrologers call it, as you, someone else would have had to have been born in the same hospital within, say, a couple of minutes.
It's a birth chart like that which astrologers look at when they're advising their individual clients. Sun sign astrology is something else. It's much simpler, but it's still rather remarkable.
You already know something about sun sign astrology because it's based on the time of year you were born and the sign of the zodiac the sun was in at that time. So you've probably always known that you were Sagittarian just because you were born between November the 23rd and December the 22nd.
Or thereabouts. The sun doesn't change signs at the same time every year or even on the same day. So if your birthday is November the 23rd, you might just be a Scorpio. Well, if your birthday is December the 22nd, there's a chance you could be a Capricorn. I'm afraid we can't answer the question for you. But if you were born on one of those dates and feel you're more like a Scorpio or a Capricorn than a Sagittarian, it would be worth your while asking an astrologer to check up with her astronomical tables and find out just where the sun was at the precise moment of your birth.
By the way, we ought to explode one old myth, the business of being born on the cusp. It's surprising just how many people think that because they were born at the beginning or end of a sun sign period, they have the characteristics of 2 signs. They're some sort of a mixture of Scorpio and Sagittarius, or Sagittarius and Capricorn.
Well, you see, it's just not true. You're a Sagittarian, yes, because the sun was in that sign when you were born. But in your full birth chart, the moon and all the other planets will also appear in the signs they occupied at your birth.
To say nothing of the all-important rising sign.
That's the sign that was rising over the eastern horizon at the moment of your birth. And astrology tells us that these factors have all contributed something to building up your individual personality.
Now, of the 8 planets, 2, Mercury and Venus, always appear from Earth to be near the Sun, and one or both of them may have been in Scorpio or Capricorn at the time of your birth.
If Venus was in Scorpio when you were born, your character as a lover will have certain Scorpio traits. If Mercury was in Capricorn, your thinking processes will work in a rather Capricorn manner. This was probably true of Paul Getty, who, on the face of it, seems a most unlikely Sagittarian. And it's why those traits may appear in your character. You can forget all about being born on the cusp. It's an astrological old wives' tale.
Now, it may seem odd to suggest that you can divide the whole of mankind into 12 sections and find any similarity between them. But wait a minute, we're already divided into only 2 categories, men and women, and no one would deny there are certain differences between the sexes. Psychology already divides us into introverts and extroverts, and we can usually recognize which of those 2 categories we fall into.
And if you've glanced at a list of your sun sign characteristics, you've probably noticed that a good few of them do match up. After you've watched this tape through, you'll probably recognize a good few more.
But I think we ought to issue a warning here. Nobody should make a major decision on the basis of their sun sign alone. If you want help from an astrologer, he or she will need to work on your whole birth chart.
And you certainly shouldn't expect to have all the characteristics you'll find listed in sun sign books as being typical of Sagittarius. But you'll certainly have a good few of them, whether you care to admit it or not.
And all the same, you'll be fascinated to know just how much you can discover about yourselves and your motives from your sun sign.
And how helpful it can be in things like love and partnership.
Your career.
Health and exercise.
Choosing a holiday.
Coping with the children.
Or even just choosing presents for other people.
So settle down and prepare to hear all the things you wanted to know about Sagittarians.
And haven't been afraid to ask.
Sagittarians in their youth have the capacity to be all the negative things we've ever heard about them. Capricious, blindly optimistic, irresponsible, careless. Fortunately, they also seem to have the keen talent for learning from their mistakes.
And among the effects of that useful talent is that while they never lose their delight in personal freedom, they're able to discipline themselves to study and make use of what's usually a very formidable intellect.
But you always need to feel free. You can't stand the slightest hint of claustrophobia, either physical or psychological. A Sagittarian trapped in a sour marriage or trapped in an unfulfilling job is a sad sight indeed. The result is that they tend often to stand out as individuals because they refuse to be confined to what other people think of as the right lines. Think how Woody Allen and Billy Connolly have pushed back the boundaries of humour, how Winston Churchill refused to be shut into one particular party.
As usual, the symbol of the sign is significant, the arrow, which you'll always aim one way or another directly at the bullseye. And it'll often seem to other people to be so far away or so high above you that they doubt whether you'll ever hit it. Well, just let them wait and see.
The Sagittarian figure is of a man with the body of a horse, and it's believed that the original was Chiron, famous in ancient times as a scholar and a doctor. And it's also true that there's usually something of the scholar and teacher about you. Astrologers, in fact, think of you as an eternal student.
The horse is significant too. You're always travelling in one way or another, not only physically but intellectually, and in a way the travelling seems to be more important than the goal. The old saying, to travel hopefully is better than to arrive, could really be your motto.
Exercise is very important to you if you're to keep in trim both physically and mentally. And you're at your best when you're busy. Inaction bores you, and when you're bored you begin to feel tired, out of sorts and restless.
There's usually some kind of fellow feeling, at the very least, between opposite signs of the zodiac. Right across that great circle from you is the sign of Gemini, and like Geminians, you're probably versatile and continually busy, often doing more than one thing at a time.
This doesn't mean that you're undisciplined. On the contrary, you probably have an excellent capacity for planning your life and coping with your work. And your dexterity of mind means that you tend to look at problems from every possible angle before you make a decision, often coming up with a new answer to an old question.
Problem solving is just your cup of tea. You love taking a problem apart to see what it's made of, exploring every conceivable way of solving it, assessing it, reassessing it, and pushing yourself until you've come up with precisely the right solution. It's the challenge you enjoy, and that means not only the challenge of the question, but the challenge of the answer. Why should that solution be the best one? After all, mightn't there be a better one just around the corner?
Some people get worried by problems, but you're just not the worrying type. In fact, I'm not sure that one of the relatively few dangers in being a Sagittarian is just that you don't worry. It's all very nice, but try not to be blindly optimistic, to assume that you have the answer to everything.
That optimism can affect all sorts of areas of life. Your probable love of fast cars, for instance, especially if you're young. Don't believe that just because you know you're quick thinking and intelligent, speed isn't as much of a danger to you as to other people. Your pleasure in being quicker than anyone else around can obviously be slightly worrying unless you discipline yourself and enjoy it only when it's safe.
And by the way, your self-confidence can lead to another danger, that as life goes on and you realize that you are indeed capable of coping with most situations that arise, you lose sight of the need to move forward with the times. That well-tried path which led you safely through your 20s and 30s may not do when you've moved into your 40s or 50s. Keep in touch with modern thought and opinion. Keep up with the youngsters. You're perfectly capable of it.
The last thing Sagittarians want is an ordinary, plodding, everyday relationship in which tomorrow holds no surprises. If they sometimes seem to take their love life rather too lightly, it's not necessarily because they're not serious about a committed relationship. They simply lay a strong emphasis on enjoyment, and that to them means variety. It follows that you're not yourself at all possessive. Jealousy is an emotion for which Sagittarians have a very healthy scorn.
This doesn't mean that you're necessarily too flirtatious or likely to be unfaithful. It's just that you need a certain amount of variety in your life, and this extends to the company of other people. You'll have a wide circle of friends, and this will naturally include people of the opposite sex. A lover shouldn't jump to conclusions about this. Friendship means a lot to you, but it does just mean that. Your deeper emotions are by no means easily stirred.
That doesn't mean, however, that you're not a very warm and passionate person. You are, and you have no difficulty in expressing your feelings. Once the flame's been ignited, there'll be no difficulty in keeping it alight.
But it'll be a great help if you share a common interest, true in every partnership, of course. But you have so much natural enthusiasm that you need to be able to communicate it, and indeed, it's rather a waste if you don't.
The rest of us may even have some difficulty in keeping up with you where sheer energy is concerned. And you might remember that we may get the impression that energy necessarily equals seriousness of purpose, and be a little surprised when all of a sudden some chance remark reveals that for you, enthusiasm is often only skin deep. You're frequently rather casual about things that other people may take more seriously.
And this inevitably includes love, which certainly will sometimes be just one of those things. Nothing wrong with that necessarily, as long as both people concerned recognize it. And your lover doesn't get a nasty shock when you suddenly make it clear, perhaps by some chance remark, that you don't really believe you're engaged in an immortal passion. So while you may well enjoy a casual affair, try to remember that your partner may regard it as more serious. Not everyone can share your on and off again attitude.
And remember, too, that some people need more than 3 hours' notice before flying off with you for a weekend in Australia. Your dislike of steady routine and careful planning could upset things, though in the early days of a new affair it may be no bad thing to spring a surprise or two. If they don't go down well, it may be a sign you've not chosen someone who'll fit in terribly well with your scheme of things.
One of the very worst things about sun sign astrology is when bad astrologers put the idea about that, say, Sagittarius won't get on with Pisces. Every sign can have a marvelous relationship with every other sign, and an astrologer advising anybody on a partnership would look at their complete chart with all the planets in all the signs, and even then wouldn't say, oh no, you can't marry him or her. The very most you can do is to point out where a couple's likely to be best suited and where there may be difficulties.
The most you can say is that there's perhaps a slightly higher chance of an immediate spark flying when you meet someone of the same element as yourself. The astrological signs have been divided over many centuries into 4 groups: fire, earth, air, and water.
Your sign falls into one of those categories. In fact, into the first. It's a fire sign, together with Aries and Leo.
Earth signs are Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn.
Air signs are Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius.
And water signs are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces.
Very roughly, fire signs tend to encourage people to be enthusiastic, earth signs to be practical, solid people, air signs to be rather intellectual and thoughtful, and water signs to be emotional and intuitive.
So someone else whose sign shares your element, a Leo or an Arian, may well seem very easy to get on with. But that's as far as it goes. It doesn't go very far.
However, we can go a little further. Let's have a quick journey through the zodiac and tell you a bit more about how you may react to people with other sun signs.
Aries is another fire sign, and you'll certainly share plenty of enthusiasm and vigor.
You may have to be patient with a Taurian, but when things get going, you'll very possibly wonder what hit you.
You'll spend a lot of time comparing notes with a Geminian about previous affairs, and this is one which certainly won't stand still.
Asked in for a cup of coffee by a Cancerian, you may well find yourself staying on, but they do tend to cling, so breaking things off won't be easy if it comes to that.
Leo is the other fire sign, so again there should be plenty of fun and games.
Virgos don't look at life as casually as you, so in all sorts of ways you may have to tread carefully. Go slowly, be cautious, all the things you find most difficult.
On the other hand, Libra will take things quite as easily as you, so you should really be able to relax and enjoy yourself. In this case, forget all about that activity. Relaxation will really mean peace and quiet.
Nothing peaceful and quiet about an affair with a Scorpio, and sparks may fly for another reason. This is a jealous sign, and you just don't understand that emotion.
You and another Sagittarian. Well, there'll be plenty of circling around each other, jockeying for position, and the chase will be the greatest fun.
I tread carefully with a Capricorn. You may be attracted to by a certain amount of opulence and splendor, but things may not be quite what you'd hoped.
You and Aquarius would be able to enjoy yourselves thoroughly without either of you feeling that you've tied yourself up for life, unless, of course, that's what you want.
Pisces won't have any difficulty in falling in with most of your plans, but tread a little carefully. They're sensitive creatures and easily hurt.
Really, we can't emphasize too strongly that you should never turn down a date with anyone just on the grounds that they have a particular sun sign. It's not possible for us, or indeed you, unless you've consulted an astrologer, to know about the other areas of your full birth chart, which could make you and the apparently least likely sun sign get on like a house on fire.
But underlining the fact that we're really only talking generally, let's look at Sagittarius in long-term relationships, partnerships, or marriage. The first thing for you to remember, though perhaps we ought to be talking to your prospective partner about this, is that you really can't bear to feel confined within a relationship. Anything slightly claustrophobic is real death to a Sagittarian.
This doesn't necessarily mean that you demand to be free to carry on with anyone you fancy who happens to fall in your way. Yes, you will hate it if your partner goes into paroxysms of jealousy every time you talk to someone you find attractive, but we're talking about other things too. For instance, you'll hate a domestic routine, which is one long roundabout ride, never progressing, never getting anywhere, and always the same. A truly Sagittarian woman will never be happy as a simple housewife, coping every day with the same chores.
So you need a partner who understands this and sparks off new interests and enthusiasms in you and encourages you to follow them up. There'll never be a dull moment, and you'll both feel the benefit, especially if the interest is something which fascinates the pair of you, because shared interests are as important as sexual compatibility where you're concerned.
It's a particularly good thing if you're both about on the same level intellectually. You won't like it if your partner runs rings round you, and he won't be happy for long if he can't keep up with you either. In fact, the second option's probably worse than the first.
If that situation does occur, it'll be necessary for your partner to encourage you to study and keep up. Apart from anything else, intellectual exercise is important to you, just as important as physical exercise.
But now let's have a look at the possibilities of a happy long-term relationship between you and another sun sign. Well, Aries is almost as freedom-loving a sign as yours, but don't forget to nurture your own relationship. Organize your days so that you're together at least sometime.
Taurians tend to be possessive, and the freedom-loving side of you won't like that. Remember, they're also rather slower in most ways.
You and Gemini will have no difficulty stimulating each other's minds. You'll be friends as well as lovers.
Cancerians won't much care for the necessity of your having as much freedom as you need, and you may be rather too carefree for them.
Not much of a problem between you and a typical Leo. If he wants to smarten you up, then make sure he pays the bills.
Virgo is an outdoor type, and so, of course, are you. Though your minds work rather differently, but you should get on very well.
And you'll get on easily with the Libran, too, though you may find you want to liven up their minds, where you'll sometimes find a few cobwebs.
Typical Scorpio jealousy will upset you, just as much as your demands for freedom will upset them, and rouse the green-eyed monster. Not, I'm afraid, an easy one.
Provided you and another Sagittarian are of about equal intelligence and share common interests, things should go swimmingly.
You and a Capricorn are likely to be very different people, but their practicality will be of great help to you when you're trying to put plans into action.
An Aquarian partner may well inspire you. You're rather traditional and can do with an injection of stimulating and forward-looking ideas.
Neither you nor Pisces are the most practical of people, and this may get you into a scrape or two, perhaps financial. But you're both easygoing and naturally happy people, and that can only be good for your partnership.
Great fun having a Sagittarian friend. The chances of our being bored when you're around are pretty well nil. Your natural enthusiasm and sense of fun is positively infectious. And even if we're not at all interested in your pet hobbies or preoccupations, it won't be long before you'll have managed to engage our attention. and then we'll find ourselves swept along by all that energy and sense of enjoyment. Because you're versatile, there's a chance that you may tend to flit from one fascinating hobby to the next, and you should guard against superficiality. Remember, you'll get far greater satisfaction and develop your excellent potential more fully if you're fairly selective. The great thing is to make quite sure that your interests are very different from each other, and then you should find that well-loved hobbies and interests will last a lifetime. This is one reason why it's a very good idea for you to join a club of similarly minded people, or at least seek out one friend who can share your interest. With any luck, he or she will have a sun sign which will encourage them to approach the whole subject more seriously, and this will rub off on you. In other ways, it's a good idea for you to put yourselves in the hands of a friend, and even to seek out one who's different from you. If you tend to be rather introspective and thoughtful, someone who loves the outdoors and will drag you off on long country walks will do you no end of good. And similarly, if you're more the outdoor type, someone who enjoys study will add another dimension to your life. Of course, you can have a good friend of any sun sign, though once more it does seem that someone of the same element, fire, remember, so that means Aries and Leo, may be more immediately attractive. An Arian will probably tend to be more extrovert and boisterous than you, and that's no bad thing, especially if you tend to be the thoughtful type.
A Taurian may irritate you, tending to be rather slow and deliberate, but it might be no bad thing. They could help to curb restlessness, which is often a problem for Sagittarians.
You and a Geminian will complement each other beautifully. His lighter, perhaps more flippant mind will distract you if you spend too many hours studying, while you can broaden and deepen his mind.
You'll need a really strong mutual interest, I think, to cement a friendship with a Cancerian. Difficult to say what. History, perhaps, or a water sport.
You should enjoy a lovely friendship with a Leo. Remember, when they start trying to push you round, that you've probably got the better mind.
Your mind and that of a Virgo should balance very well. You can make the general plans, while they're splendid at the small details.
You'll probably have to take the lead in pretty well everything where a Libran friend is involved, but you should have no difficulty in gripping and keeping their interest.
A good argument should solidify rather than damage a friendship, and there'll be plenty of that between you and a Scorpio. I wouldn't care to say which will win, your breadth of vision or Scorpio's intensity and passion.
Alas, a sporty Sagittarian often rather dislikes a more thoughtful one, and vice versa, so you'd better make sure you're on the same wavelength before you go off on holiday together.
Cool, ambitious Capricorn and warm, affectionate Sagittarius. Not easy, I think.
But you will have something in common with most Aquarians, and their ability to surprise you should enliven the friendship.
And Pisces, again, a lot of sympathy here, though you could be irritated by their emotionalism, which may seem more like sentimentality to you.
I suppose perhaps the chief difficulty for a Sagittarian where work's concerned is that he or she needs to see every step ahead clearly marked, while on the other hand you do need continual stimulation and challenge, and this means there must be a certain element of the unexpected.
Yes, but perhaps there's an even more important element, and it's connected with their love of and need for freedom. As we've already hinted, you really can't cope with a regular, unvaried routine. The Sagittarian who works in an office where she has to sit at the same desk every day, coping with the same papers, dealing with the same problems, will end up as bored as the frustrated Sagittarian woman who faces the same domestic tasks in the same kitchen.
Well, yes, of course, some of us find ourselves faced with just that situation. One of the antidotes, if you really can't find any way of injecting a little variation into your working hours, is to see that you get plenty during your leisure time.
But to stay with work for a moment, all Sagittarians, when they're thinking of going for a particular job, should remember that they need, to a certain extent, to be able to do things in their own way, and ideally to work in a situation where the unexpected can happen, and sometimes does. If you have a Sagittarian child thinking about a career, remember that. Remember, too, that general planning is your strongest attribute rather than detail. You're excellent at laying out plans and seeing the overall pattern, getting the whole thing into perspective. Best to leave the detail to others, the Virgos of this world, for instance. Working in detail, you may tend to get impatient, and that'll lead to your taking shortcuts and making silly, careless mistakes.
And as to choosing a job, well, remember your breadth of vision and your adventurous spirit. And that seems to suggest travel and the travel industry in general, especially if this means that from time to time you can get away from the office on business trips. Indeed, any job that offers that possibility may well be right up your street. You usually have a natural flair for languages too, and that can be turned to good account, especially within the new Europe.
If all this is beginning to sound as though international salesmanship is what we're talking about, that could well be. But you may also feel at home in publishing, the law, the church, teaching, though I think at college and university level rather than with small children.
We find some Sagittarians, like some Arians, very happy in professional sport, and they can be very successful too. A different kind of challenge there, but challenge all the same, you see, and it's an element you really need in your life. And by the way, you need it not only at work, but at play.
Indeed, should you find yourself stuck in a dull and monotonous job, the best possible antidote would be to set yourself some really horrific spare time task, some challenge so tough it almost seems impossible, and really thoroughly go for it. Learning a language could well be ideal.
In general, this should be as much of a contrast to your work as possible. If it largely engages your mind, then in your spare time, go for physical activity and vice versa. In general, though, I think it's physical activity that will win, if often with an intellectual element. Travel, for instance, which may turn out to be adventurous and unusual, and which needs planning beforehand. The quintessential Sagittarian recreation would be to go off to Peru and explore unmapped forests miles from civilization, and with a radio which went wrong on the first day out. Or, of course, hunting game through Central Africa, with a camera, of course.
That's maybe going a bit far, but it's on the right lines. And if you can't do anything of the sort, or if you're really not that type of Sagittarian, you'll certainly enjoy reading about such adventures, or perhaps enjoy a different sort of hunt. Many Sagittarians get a great deal of pleasure from hunting antiques or sales bargains. And you'll get a great deal of fun restoring what you find, whether that means unpicking and resewing the seams, or stripping and repolishing the chairs.
That can be quite rewarding financially, of course, as well as being a fascinating hobby. But let's look more closely at Sagittarians' attitude to money.
This really isn't an area of life in which most Sagittarians have a strong natural interest, though of course they'll cope with it as best they may when they have to, like most of us.
In general, when you have a little spare cash and you're wondering what to do with it, you'll tend to think of areas of investment which interest you rather than others which seem a good thing financially. You're probably rather too easily grabbed by an idea which appeals to you. Anybody who turns up with a new notion and can present it to you enthusiastically and persuasively could probably part you from £1 or two, however ill-founded the idea really might be.
Yes, you can get easily carried away with enthusiasm, and one fatal result is that you may tend to put all your invested eggs into one basket. Not a good idea. You're also an easy touch for anyone with a hard luck story, and that too may be good news for someone looking for money, but won't by any means be good news for your bank manager.
I'm afraid you may have a strong gambling streak too. See a couple of men gambling on which raindrop will reach the bottom of the window pane first, and I will wager that one of them will be a Sagittarian. This can obviously lead you not only to the roulette table, but to rather chintzy investments. So what we're saying is that if and when you think of investing, it's wisest to get a good advisor and take serious notice of what he or she says.
This goes for business too. If you start your own company, it's probably a bad idea for you to go it entirely alone. You should have a partner to keep an eye on the financial side of the enterprise, because even if you're confident that you can cope, you may well find that you get so tied up with the planning and selling side that you haven't enough time for the books. And when you do turn to them, your dislike for detail won't help you to get them into apple pie order.
By the way, if your partner also turns out to be a husband or wife, so much the better, not only from the point of view of the marriage, but the business too. Anyway, a partner, a good accountant, you really do need. then you'll be free to employ your natural exuberance on your clients.
Where investment is concerned, there's certainly no harm in your suggesting to your broker that he should look at the possibility of areas in which you're specially interested. And traditionally, these incline towards publishing, both newspapers and books, the other media, the luxury trades, the gas and travel industries, and any area in which learning or research is involved, especially export businesses.
Okay, everybody, ready now? Come together now. 1, 2, 3, get those legs right down. 1. Okay, everybody, well done.
Traditionally, over a couple of thousand years and more, the signs of the zodiac have been associated with various areas of the body. Aries with the head, Taurus with the neck and throat, and so on down to Pisces and the feet. The Sagittarian body area is the hips and thighs, and it often happens that there can be problems with that area. Certainly Sagittarian women will probably find that they put on weight around the hips with remarkable ease, while elderly Sagittarians may perhaps begin to creak a little around those joints.
But perhaps it's more important to remember when you're still quite young that the Sagittarian body organ is the liver. You enjoy your food and drink, and should you enjoy them too much, it's your liver that will inevitably start to protest. You're not at all good at dieting, so it's by far the best thing just to use a little moderation. Not that that'll be easy either.
If you do go right over the top and those hips disappear in a roll of fat, then faced with the real necessity to diet, try to look at it as a challenge. Turn it into a positive battle to be fought to the death. Exercise
will play its part, of course, and you really do need exercise. If you don't get it, not only your body, but your whole personality suffers. You feel sluggish and dull, and you become sluggish and dull. The problem is that efficient exercise must be a part of your regular routine. And if there's one thing you absolutely can't stand, it's regular routine.
So, what to do? Well, the most obvious answer involves, I'm afraid, a certain amount of expense. Join a good gym or a health club. There you'll find an instructor who will set you several routines which you can change day by day, or at least week by week. You'll also find classes you can join, which again will probably vary a little, and in which, anyway, you'll find other people with whom you can compete, and with whom afterwards you'll be able to chat while relaxing in the sauna.
Most good gyms also have a wide variety of exercise machines and weights with which you can work, and that'll provide variation. If you really can't afford the subscription, or if there isn't a gym within reach, then don't waste money buying exercise machines for the home. The chances are that you'll be bored out of your mind within a week. Try to find someone with whom you can run or jog or even walk, and choose a different route each day. At all times, think about minimizing the boredom factor. It's the only way, I think, that you'll stick at it and get the exercise you need. By the way, Sagittarius has a lovely traditional relationship with all forms of riding. That's why this picture by Velasquez will probably appeal to you.
Of course, if you're relatively young, sport is another answer. And again, sport should probably change with the season. Football or hockey in winter, tennis or swimming in summer. Variety really is the name of the game where you're concerned. By the way, if you're into sport, or indeed any exercise, remember you do tend to take risks, and there can be accidents.
This may be especially true as you grow older. It becomes necessary eventually for all of us to modify our exercise regime. You won't be at all eager to do this, and as a result you could well all too easily pull a muscle or strain a tendon, sometimes without realizing it. It's not easy for you to be careful or even moderately cautious. A whole hogger, that's you. Well, just remember that over-enthusiastic exercise may force you to be a half or even a quarter hogger. So take care. One final word. It's really vital for all Sagittarians to remember that they're quite seriously prone to restlessness. Only one way to avoid it: by making sure you have interests which are physically and intellectually demanding and regularly change from one to the other. That's really your key to inner fulfillment.
Your probably high metabolism will mean that you use energy fairly freely. So as far as diet's concerned, you should see that you get energy-producing high-protein food. Sugar, of course, produces energy, but Alas, it also produces fat, and those hips may show evidence of it. So it's a good idea to try to curb what's probably a naturally sweet tooth.
There's another problem here too. Your general impatience, your tendency to rush about, especially when you're young, may prompt you to overindulge in junk food. Yes, very convenient, but also not terribly good for you, and almost certainly not slimming. You should try to shop and cook thoughtfully. It really will be worth it in the end.
Again, traditionally, citrus fruits are good for you, especially grapefruit, but all fruits containing vitamin C. If there's a good health store in your neighborhood, make a habit of calling in. You should be able to find nibbles there, which will help you to avoid sweets and chocolate and confectionery in general.
And finally, your psychological and physical well-being are strongly linked. If you begin to feel depressed, then look at your lifestyle in general. Something may be lacking. Perhaps something as simple as sufficient space in which to move around. Get the latter right, and the former will cheer up.
If I think of a Sagittarian man, one image always seems to come to mind. A chap of late middle age, but somehow still looking about 25, with an old pair of grey flannel trousers, a college blazer, probably with the lining torn, an open-neck shirt and a tie hanging down from it, or perhaps a polo neck sweater. Yes, and probably tennis shoes.
Nobody is as casual as a Sagittarian, and they do sometimes cling on to their youth longer than any other sign. Not, I hasten to add, in a silly or childish sort of way. They just seem to be determined to remain young until after their 100th birthday. Think of the ever-young Jane Fonda, for instance. Well, there's not a lot wrong with that.
But it can, of course, mean problems, especially if the occasion's a formal one and you should really be wearing a neat suit or a formal gown. You'll probably just shrug and come as you are, but it's not invariably good policy when you need to make friends and influence people.
The thing is, not so much that you want to shock, you just need to feel comfortable in your clothes. And you'll bend the rules anyway if you have to. You can't be doing with restrictive clothes, so forget about tight skirts, and unless they're absolutely necessary, neatly buttoned suits. If you have to wear an evening gown, Sagittarian women, I'd suggest you go for separates, perhaps in pure silk, a nice full skirt. The colours of the sign are dark blue and royal purple, and the stone is topaz, but topazes are rather rare and very expensive, so you might do well to use a citrine, which makes a very good compromise.
Tell you what you'll be most comfortable in when the occasion permits, a tracksuit or a jumpsuit. Happily, these can often be highly fashionable and colourful enough to satisfy your need for variety.
And by the way, you're unlikely to be seen without a large bag of some kind, full of books, magazines, bits of clothing. Sagittarian handbags have everything but the kitchen sink in them, and sometimes one suspects even that.
But what about Sagittarius at home? Well, for a start, you'll be most comfortable if your home is at least somewhere near a piece of open ground of some kind. You won't care to live in one of 110 identical flats in a building facing a similar block. You need to be able to look out of your window and see a view of some kind, preferably of open country.
Your hatred of claustrophobia will extend to your home itself, too. Open-plan living will appeal to you. Walls are there, on the whole, to be knocked down. Even in the smallest flat, you'll find some way of creating a space for yourself which seems more roomy than it actually is.
On the other hand, there'll be corners of the house which will be in the most indescribable muddle. Books, magazines, old wellies, pieces of clothing, all thrown down at random. Life's too short to spend time being tidy.
You can imagine that this will irritate some partners. But it's a habit so ingrained in most typical Sagittarians that it'll be very difficult indeed to correct. Then there's that hunting instinct, which over the years is likely to have resulted in the acquisition of a number of articles which, well...
Would better have been left on the trestle table at the village jumper sale?
Well, I wouldn't put it as precisely as that, but as a matter of fact, yes. Pieces of furniture or crockery, clothes or rugs or vases, which looked a wonderful bargain when you saw them, probably turned out not to go too well with anything else when you got them home. But, well, yes, they were such a bargain. And, oh, those second-hand books. Not to mention all the latest ones.
Consequently, unless somebody else has had a salutary effect on it, the Sagittarian home will be no place for anyone with a sense of order. And don't, if you're that sort of person, offer to help wash up after a meal. You will not believe the state of the kitchen.
Which is not to say that you won't have a very good meal. Perhaps a splendidly rich and nourishing game casserole with plenty of spices, followed by a fairly fruity dessert, maybe involving currants or sultanas. And as for a starter, well, a popular Sagittarian fruit is a grapefruit, or maybe an artichoke or an onion salad. All bulb vegetables are traditionally associated with your sun sign, by the way.
The tableware will be rather solid and chunky. Now here, for instance, a teacup and saucer, which will probably appeal to Sagittarius, chunky enough, large enough. You may get your coffee in it after dinner, I should think, plenty of coffee. And the bamboo theme on the side that remind them of faraway places and strange-sounding names. Sagittarians tend to like out-and-to-table dishes, and for goodness sake, don't dissuade them, one less dish to clear up later. The plates may be pictorial, and the glasses will be large and dependable, nothing too fragile.
Sagittarians can be rather restless sleepers, so single beds might be the rule if there's any consideration at all for the partner, or at least a bed big enough to keep out of the way of your threshing limbs. There'll be plenty of bedside reading about, and maybe a Walkman with some country and western tapes, or some soothing guitar music.
And here, or in the bedroom, some spicy, fresh, rather open-air perfumes. No Sagittarian really likes anything too sweet. Oh, and there may not be a razor. A lot of Sagittarian men experiment with a beard at some time or other in their lives. Of all the signs of the zodiac, Sagittarius is most associated with the idea of travel. The slightest chance of taking a journey, whether it's nipping into the nearest town on the bus or slipping over to Australia for a conference, and you're off. Remember, we've already suggested you might like to work in the travel industry, which, apart from anything else, with any luck, will entitle you to a good discount on airline tickets. You probably started independent travel fairly early, and if you did so, you may already have learned your lesson. If you haven't, here it is. Remember, that small detail tends to bore you, but where travel's concerned, you really must pay some attention to planning if things aren't going to go badly wrong at one stage or another. Fine to wave your arm and say, oh yes, I'm going to look in at Easter Island on the way to Australia, and then when you get there, you find there are only 2 planes a year. It's really quite a good idea to involve someone else in the planning of your excursions, even if they're not going with you. Get a home-loving Virgoan to indulge her love of detail and plan your itinerary down to the last detail. She'll love it, and you're far less likely to find yourself on the wrong flight to the wrong place. Try not to lose your sense of proportion altogether, because you may find that once you're off on your trip, it's very difficult indeed to stop. You get to your destination, and it's all fine and dandy, but there's a much more interesting place just over the horizon. And when you get there, well, yes, there'll be a much more interesting place. See what I mean? The obvious answer to this is a round-the-world trip, and there's probably not a Sagittarian watching this who wouldn't jump at the chance. Yet even that, I wouldn't be absolutely confident that the moment you get back, you wouldn't be sitting down mentally ticking off all the places you couldn't get to and planning the next trip. If you're confined, as most of us are, to an annual getaway of 2 or 3 weeks, then at least make the most of it. Think at least of making the occasional really adventurous journey, perhaps camping out, exploring really open landscapes. Again, make your plans carefully, or see that someone makes them for you. And remember that even if you're prepared to put up with some discomfort for the sake of adventure, you'll probably not be very happy unless you can get your teeth into at least 1 good meal a day. You'll enjoy the sun as much as anyone else, and you'll often seek it out in winter, probably as part of a skiing holiday. And winter sports are good for you, not only because you'll get rid of a slice of tedious old winter that way, but because the challenge of becoming a better skier will please you. The exercise will be excellent too, provided you don't allow yourself to be over-ambitious and do yourself an injury. If you go to a more ordinary holiday resort, perhaps for family reasons, make sure you have a good supply of reading matter, and if possible that the hotel has some extra facilities, a pool, a gym or whatever, to alleviate the boredom of just sitting about. And by the way, you'll very much enjoy meeting local people, so try to make a point of using local transport and mixing as much as possible. Learn a few phrases of the language at least before you go. It'll all help you enjoy what should be a major factor in any Sagittarian's life, the sheer pleasure of travel. And by the way, astrological tradition links particular places with particular signs of the zodiac, and we often find that we enjoy visiting the places associated with our sun sign. Sagittarian countries include Spain, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Arabia, and Australia, and among the cities are Toledo, Avignon, Naples, Stuttgart, Cologne, Budapest, and Toronto.
It has been known for unwanted children to appear in a Sagittarian partnership, and that can be a distinct trial unless you've really made up your mind to have children and plan for them, realizing that your freedom-loving life is bound to be circumscribed for a year or two. There could be trouble.
Unfortunately, you not only enjoy a lively sex life, but you tend, as we've pointed out from time to time, to be somewhat careless. Enough said. But once the children have arrived and you're reconciled to the fact that whether you're mum or dad, you really must be prepared to give up a considerable amount of time to them, you can, of course, be wonderful parents.
Yes, your enthusiasm and optimism make you the best and most stimulating companions a child could want. But while what Derek said is quite true, and you must be prepared to give them plenty of time, remember that you also need to get away from your children occasionally. This is almost certainly going to be more of a problem if you're a woman than if you're a man. A lively Sagittarian mum will find that she really can't remain bright and intelligent if she's imprisoned with a 1 or 2-year-old for 16 hours a day. There just won't be enough intellectual stimulus, so by hook or by crook, by organising a babysitting circle or persuading Dad to spend more time with the baby, you must get away and follow your own interests for an hour or two every day, or indeed take up a new and very stimulating one which really grabs your imagination.
And please don't, feel even slightly guilty about it. Remember that if you're stunned into being a zombie by continual baby talk, it's not only you who'll suffer in the end, it'll be your son or daughter.
Having sorted that problem out, all should be set fair, because you're adaptable enough to find bringing up children absolutely fascinating. You look at them from the first, not as kids, awful word, but as grown-ups who happen to be smaller than you. You shouldn't have any problem at all with the generation gap, because you'll be fascinated to discover their opinions, to argue and discuss every idea that comes up.
Perhaps more than most people, you may have to curb your impatience if your children turn out to be somewhat slower than you to grasp and be enthusiastic about a new idea, especially if they're of particular other sun signs. More of that in a moment. Remember, some people do need more time than you do to see the potential of something which is strange and new to them.
And by the way, expect to have to go into rather more detail than you may be prepared for. A lot of people aren't as willing as you to accept a broad outline and need to have it filled in a bit.
I suppose your own natural preference will be for outdoor excursions and events, theme parks, sports gatherings, country walks, and so on.
But be prepared for a certain amount of give and take. If your youngster shows a greater interest in, say, art galleries or museums, go along with her. Your natural interest in pretty well everything will prevent you from being bored, and you may even discover a great new interest.
This could be one of the advantages of having a child who doesn't share your own sun sign, and it's quite likely, after all, that they won't. Of course, if they do, then you should find little difficulty in translating what we're saying into their terms. As parents of a Sagittarian child, you'll probably find that he or she will be either extremely bookish or extremely sporty. If you can encourage a better balance, that'll be an excellent thing. And if you're sporty and they're bookish, then don't try to convert them.
Aryan children are pretty straightforward, and you'll identify with that. You should be able to cope with their tendency to be easily bored through your own enthusiasm and interest. You may find your Aryan will give you a run for your money where physical energy is concerned, and as for argue, well, there'll never be a dull moment.
Basically, you'll probably find a Taurian a little taxing. They do tend to be deliberate and slightly slow in their thinking, and sometimes physically too. You'll just have to adjust to that, though there'll be something to be said for chivying them along a bit. Try not to be irritated by their possessiveness, which may mean they'll cling more than many children.
You may find a Gemini child almost becomes your rival. They'll be as quick thinking as you. They, like you, can become very restless, so try to be a settling influence. And try to encourage them to take things steadily, rather than using their energy in spurts.
I don't suppose you'll entirely relish all that Cancerian emotion, but don't be too impatient, even about their tendency to burst into tears when life becomes difficult. Warmth and affection will comfort them. Allow them to look after you and wean them slowly.
Leo likes to be boss, not the easiest thing to put up with in a small child. But once you're aware of this, you should be able to find some compromise. Your mutual enthusiasm and energy should help you to have a lot of fun.
You could learn a lot from your Virgoan child, but their critical attitude and attention to detail may drive you up the wall. And they may be warriors. Help them to be rational and listen to them. You could also do far worse than let them help you with your planning, especially at holiday time.
Encourage your Libran child to make up its own mind rather than depend on you for a decision. Remember, he or she will need harmony, not something which very much concerns you. Too many off-the-cuff decisions and sudden surprises will upset rather than delight them. Keep surprises down a bit.
Make sure Scorpio energy is positively used. Keep the young bodies active and watch out for any tendency to jealousy. And just because you're an open book, don't be too upset by natural Scorpio secrecy. It's natural for them, but try to counter it.
Encourage your young Capricorns' ambitious schemes and their individual efforts, perhaps in athletics. If they seem emotionally rather cruel, that's natural for them, so try to accept it.
Always expect the unexpected from Aquarius. Try never to seem too surprised, and do your best not to be too exasperated by their stubbornness. The best way of persuasion is often to suggest they do the opposite of what you really want.
Sensitive and perhaps lacking in self-confidence, your Piscean child will need your backing and encouragement. Warm, loving support will build on good potential and make it easier when you have perhaps to rebuke them for deceptive behavior. One of the things about sun sign astrology is that while it's fun, it can also be very useful. And one of the most useful pieces of information it can give you is the sort of presents to give people. Wouldn't you just love this little horse? He, like you, knows exactly where he's going. You'll know already that you love reading and that a book on something that interests you will always be welcome. You'd also enjoy the gift of a new experience, something you haven't done. Skiing lessons, driving on a skid pan, going up in a balloon. Drop a hint. You may end up doing something you simply wouldn't have thought of doing if some friend hadn't pushed you.
Arians like receiving almost any kind of present. So much so, in fact, that it's quite difficult to persuade them to keep it unopened until Christmas or birthday or whatever anniversary it is. It's good if people take the trouble to find out their special interest, of course, and cater for that. Where books are concerned, they love a good yarn. Frederick Forsyth probably writes almost entirely for them, and their James Bond books may well have lost their covers by now.
Taurians are a bit choosy. Far better to give them a small present which has real quality than something large, expensive, and a touch vulgar. A piece of original pottery will usually go down well, and Taurians often love music, so provided you find out their taste, a disc or a cassette or a video will be welcome.
Oh yes, a book by a favourite author for Gemini, certainly. He or she will always want to keep up with the latest releases on paper or on disc, so anything in this week's top 10 will get you home and dry. Don't neglect the possibility of a subscription to a favourite magazine. The car may be a preoccupation of your favourite Gemini, and that may be a clue to something acceptable. A lot of them enjoy writing, so a pen or a packet of special paper, perhaps. And the Geminian who has everything will be delighted by one of those silly executive toys, even if it's relegated to a top shelf within a week or so.
Most Cancerians are collectors on a large or small scale. Their collections will range from pieces of silver to stamps, from books to garden gnomes. So all you have to do is to find out what they collect And that's a present problem solved in the happiest way. They love little knick-knacks, so a gift from wherever you've taken your holiday will probably go down well. And since Cancerian skin can be a problem, some skin food or hand cream or really luxurious soap will be welcome.
A couple of gold bars should keep Leo happy till the next birthday. No? Oh, well, something else then. But remember, quality before quantity. A Leo would much rather have a cup of coffee at the Ritz than a whole dinner in a steak bar. Presents that help Leo with any creative hobby will definitely be a good thing. Paintbrushes, maybe, or a length of silk. They often enjoy the cinema or theatre, so an evening out may be the answer. And they love beautiful glass, so an ornament or a set of glasses will usually please them.
The Goans love natural fabric, so something hand-carved from wood or hand-knitted from wool, they'll love it. In fact, something to wear is a pretty good idea, whether it's a small silk scarf or an enormous woolen one. They're usually meticulous about their personal appearance, so anything for the bathroom will go down well. Skin foods, toilet water, towels. But the perfume should be light and unobtrusive. They may like gardening, so seeds or gardening gloves.
Any beauty product will please a Libran, and a favourite perfume will be particularly welcome. Depending on how friendly you are, a really glamorous piece of lingerie will make you popular, but so will the occasional bouquet of flowers. By the way, the men, too, usually like to wear a not too obvious perfume. Librans love music on the whole, so something by their favourite group or composer may be an answer. Oh, and they love rather escapist books, something really to take them out of themselves.
Talk about lingerie for Libra, what about Scorpio? Yes, certainly. But they'll also probably love a bottle or two of really good wine. It's the rare Scorpio that doesn't enjoy a glass. Fragrances go down well with either sex, usually rather musky ones with a rather heavy scent. Some essential oils, perhaps, for a massage. Almost anything, in fact, for the dressing table.
Rather like Leos, Capricorns love quality. And once more, buy something small but good rather than opulent and cheap. Quality clothes often mean a lot, so a fine silk handkerchief or tie, maybe, or a fine leather something for the businessman's desk. Capricorns are the bookworms of the zodiac too, so just discover their taste and add to their favourite row of books. Sports equipment is also often a very good idea. And by the way, don't expect really effusive thanks. Capricorns can be a little cool in expressing their gratitude, even when they're most delighted.
Aquarians will always be happy with something slightly unusual. The women like rather sparkly jewellery, and both sexes enjoy anything which will appeal to their romantic streak, which may be latent, but's always there somewhere. They generally seem to like mirrors for some reason, so an originally designed hand mirror will perhaps be popular, or one of those panoramic mirrors for the car.
And finally, Pisces, who will really be so pleased to think you've remembered them that they won't mind if you give them the least suitable present you can think of. But you won't want to do that, so try a really splendid potted plant, or a box of fine sweets or candy, anything in silk or velvet, and any Piscean woman will love a pair of pretty bedroom slippers.
And there's where we come to the end of this introduction to what astrology has to say about your sun sign.
Usually when you talk to people about their sign, you find they're rather surprised at just how accurate astrology is in earmarking some of their virtues and faults, their tastes and habits.
If you felt that way, we ought to leave you with just one thought. The sun can tell you something about yourself, but it's nothing to what the whole birth chart has to say. And we hope that if you found this video interesting, you'll go on to find out more about astrology and just how useful it can be.
Goodness knows life today is complicated enough, and we can all do with all the help we can get to get us through it as smoothly as possible, not to mention helping us to relax and enjoy it. Anyway, thanks for your company.
And goodbye.